Well, let's get started here. This is the video for 5.2.1 on onKeyHold, one of our final KeyPress events that will help us out. This seems pretty easy and straightforward, so you might think, why are we just spending an entire thing on just one key event function? Because this key event function operates completely different from everything else we've done so far, so buckle up, all right? I got some different tabs open here. Obviously, I'm in full screen mode, so you won't see the tabs, but I'm going to shift over to them so you can give you guys some tips and tricks on things you can try to better understand this, especially because it is going to throw you a concept that you do not quite know until unit 10 or 11-ish, roughly. So those guys who already know Java a little bit or have known about arrays or already know about lists, then this is pretty straightforward. But for everyone else, I'm going to try to dumb it down as much as I can without giving too much information to overwhelm you. So let's start with the first one here. Basically, it's a quick introduction on onKeyHold compared to onKeyPress and onKeyRelease. So let's just test this out. We can always check what's going on here first. And again, for every one of these, I'm always putting an app.background equals white because I like everything in dark mode, so it doesn't actually make the background white. So I'm forcing it to be so. We can see clearly as a counter, as I can see in the center of the screen here. And line 7, very similar to what we've done so far. onKeyPress, onKeyRelease, now it's onKeyHold with the parameter keys. And we're saying that we're taking the counter label we had in line 5, taking its value, so in this case it's 0 right here, and we're saying, hey, increment the value by 1. Now in your case, yours is going to actually show up like this, plus equals. I just typed it in a way that does the exact same thing, just in the official terminology. So it's going to take the current value, which is 0, add 1 to it, so now it's 1, and then restore it back into the value of the counter, so now it updates it so that's actually 1. So let's just try it out. Any key I press, I'm going to press and hold the letter A. Okay, it's increasing. I'm going to press and hold the letter Q. It's increasing. I'm pressing and holding the letter 5. It's increasing. There's some specific characters that work, like tab. If I hold tab, tab works. I think enter works, and I believe space should work as well. Yeah, those 3 work as well. Other special ones like shift and control do not work, but this you can kind of play around with to get an idea of how that works. Okay, cool, easy. Seems fine, right? Here's the issue though. If you had some strict eyes here and some very clever eyes, you would notice that, wait, why is it called keys and not key? Isn't it normally key? Why is it called keys? And normally I would tell you this word, again, doesn't really matter. I can call it whatever I want to. But the reason why they defaulted to keys is because the way this function actually works is that it's actually listening constantly. I mean, just like onMousePress and onMouseRelease, onKeyPress, onKeyRelease, it's always listening. But what happens is anytime you're holding a specific key, it's going to store that value and hold onto it, which means you can actually hold multiple keys at the same time. So this keys idea here allows it to check for more than just one, and it can hold actually more than just one character. Why this is very important is because up to this point in time, variables never have been able to hold more than one thing. Like, we've never been able to do something like this where x equals 1, 2, 3, 4. We couldn't put multiple values into one. It wouldn't work until you learn about lists, which is what they're talking about. Where is it? I think it's in the next part right here. Down here. This is the idea of lists. So what keys actually is here is it's a list. Now, my best way to describe lists without going too into detail is imagine you have an Excel spreadsheet. And you have a column A, column B, column C, and you have like row 1, row 2, row 3. Imagine it's an Excel spreadsheet where there's only one row and however many columns you want. So it's a very limited Excel spreadsheet, but it's still a spreadsheet where in that one row, you can hold a bunch of different values simultaneously. So the way that keys work is it's going to listen and store in itself however many keys are currently being pressed and held. So the way you have to approach this now is instead of saying something like keys equals to z, which you guys have done up to this point for most of everything else for onKeyPress and onKeyRelease, we now have to check, hey, is the character z in the keys list? That's basically the one way to translate it, okay? So here, if we run this, it's saying if z is in the keys list itself, then increase the counter value plus, or increase it by 1, or increment by 1. So I'm going to press to hold letter A, nothing happens. Press and hold spacebar, nothing happens. Press and hold the P character, nothing happens. If I press and hold Z, now it increases. Super useful when you want very specific things to do certain tasks. And so this is nice for you guys to get your creative juices flowing for the creative task. Let's show an example where this would not work. If you do it this way, where you say keys is equal to Z, and I try to run this, so let me scroll back up here. I am pressing and holding Z, nothing happens. I just realized in the previous example, my face might have accidentally covered it up. So I'm going to try to zoom out a little bit so that you guys can, or at least scroll up and down so you guys can see what's going on here. So let's see, we're pressing and holding Z and nothing happens. And that's because keys is a list and not actually a variable. And you might say, well, but isn't that the same idea, Mr. Park? You're storing something into something? I'm like, to an extent. Lists are a bit more complicated than that. But as a very similar, like very simple way to go about it, it's just a I guess you can call it a variable for now, just to keep it consistent. It's checking to make sure that there's more than one thing in that list in and of itself. Okay, so now that we have that, let's try multiple keys, like I mentioned before. And this is the really good usefulness for this here. We can now check if Z is in the keys and if X is in the keys as well. And again, lists are different because let's just suppose, let's pretend like you guys thought the list looks like this. This is not how you make a list, but let's just pretend it looks like this. If I were to say, hey, if X is equal to 1, how are you saying like, oh, if any of the values are 1? Are you saying a specific value is 1? That's why you have to be very careful here. And so there's specific terminology we'll learn when we get to the content about lists. But for now, just understand this is how we set it up. If Z is in keys and, hey, compound conditionals, back from 5.1. And if X is also in keys simultaneously, so if both are being held and pressed at the same time, we increase the counter by 5. So let's try it. Or sorry, counter by 1, my apologies. So I'm pressing and holding Z by itself. Nothing happens. I'm pressing and holding X by itself. Nothing happens, because when you press both at the same time, which I am doing now we get the numbers incrementing as such. All right, let's keep going. The real use case here is when you're trying to make a sort of two-dimensional game of some sort. So think like Super Mario Bros, think Pac-Man, think any other basic game that you've done in the past or played in the past. Now we can add some of that stuff. Now, we don't have animation yet, that's in Unit 6, but use this plus Unit 6, you guys are gonna be set for the creative tasks there. Hopefully you guys don't go too crazy, but I'm hoping that you are getting some creative juices flowing here. So in this case, we now have a dot that is really just a circle, that's cyan. We can clearly see that on the screen here. And when I'm pressing and holding down the right arrow key, so if the right arrow key is in the keys list, we're gonna take the center X of that dot, or the circle, and increment it by 1, which means if I'm increasing the X by 1, it's gonna move right 1 unit every single time I hold the key. So I'm holding the right arrow key, and it's moving slowly because we're increasing the X value by 1. So there's 400 pixels, right? So it's gonna take a while for it to get to that part, even though we started at X equals 200. Cool, lovely, nice. Let's now add some flair to it, where instead of just compound conditionals, we now do nested conditionals. As you can see here, we have an if statement, and there's an if statement nested inside of it, or under it, or within it, however you want to phrase that. So in this one, this is talking about a wraparound, so most likely you can guess what's going to happen. If it wants to go through the edge of the screen, it's going to wrap around to the beginning. But we're going to have to be very careful to see exactly how they're implementing this. So we have a dot, just like before. It's cyan, just like before. onKeyHold, same thing. Right is in keys, same thing. Dot center plus equals 10. So it's going to move a lot more this time. What's going to happen, though, is there's a nested conditional where it's saying that if the left side of the dot is greater than or equal to 400, so let's translate that. Left side of the dot. I know that this is the dot right here, the cyan circle. Left side is kind of where my mouse is, and I realize you guys can't see this, so let me try it again. Left side is where my mouse is, right around here. If that left side hits 400 or surpasses it, or in other words, if it's on the right side of the screen and away, then it's going to do something. So as soon as that left side of the circle hits that point at x equals 400, or even greater than 400, doesn't have to be 400, it has to be greater than or equal to 400, then it's going to say, hey, make the right side of the dot equal to 10, or sorry, equal to 0. So what that means is as soon as this left side disappears from the screen, take the right side of the circle and put it on the left where x is 0. So what's going to happen is once it exits the screen on the right side, it should go to the left side, but you shouldn't be able to see it quite just yet. If you press this correctly, you should not be able to see the circle for just a split moment. Let's try. So I'm going to get it over, I'm going to hold it a little bit. Okay, I'm going to try to test this out. So look at the left side, left side, left side, left side. It's off the screen now. It should have gone to the left-hand side of the screen at this point. I'm going to press it again. It should now come from the left-hand side. Bingo. There we go. Perfect. Now, the reason why I take it slow and steady is because a lot of you guys will start making mistakes because you're not looking at the code. You're looking at the solution and not the code itself. I'm going to make this announcement again in class. I apologize if this is the second time I'm saying it, but I'm sorry, not sorry, because I cannot explain this enough. You need to be looking at the code written out, logically think about what's going on, instead of looking at the canvas and banking on that to solve all your problems. A lot of the times, you guys miss some very small minor detail because of the logic in your code. One small mistake can screw up your entire thing. So please, please keep that in mind. Last thing I will probably mention here is this special function. And now, the only way to really access this is, one, if you paid attention to the lesson, or two, if you capitalize on the docs and colors tab up here, or as I call it, the documentation. In a separate tab, I've opened up the docs and colors here, so this is what you normally see. I typed in onKeyPress, or sorry, onKeyHold, and notice that it's going to take me to the function section. So when it takes me there, it tells me exactly what it does. onKeyHold is a function that repeatedly That's called repeatedly while keys are held down. So we just talked about that. But you now see a separate thing here. And you also see some code down here. Let's go through some of these just to give you guys a bit of a clarification on what's going on here. So down here, I took this code. I was like, oh, interesting. I want to see what's going on with this. It's onKeyHold. Okay, same thing we just saw in our lesson here. And I just typed it in here. That's all I did. And so what we can see now, if I run this so it clears the screen here, it's going to say that when I press and hold a key, there's going to be a key label that's already presented on the screen. Currently, there's nothing inside of it. Or I should say it's got an empty character inside of it. And it's going to say, change the label to whatever is in the list of keys. Oh, interesting. So if I press and hold A, what should show up on the screen? I'm pressing and holding A. The A character shows up on the screen. Now, I'm not going to release A. I'm holding A right now. What if I also press and hold B? Is it just going to show B now? It's going to show both A and B? Let's take a look. Interesting. I'm pressing and holding both A and B. It's showing both A and B. And so this is where you need to understand keys is not like a variable where it can only hold one type of thing. Here, we're holding two types of things. That's where keys and lists and variables are very different. I'm going to hold and press the letter C, hold and press the letter D, hold and press the letter E, and I'm running out of fingers here. So I'm going to slowly release, slowly release, slowly release, slowly release. And now, unfortunately, if I let go, there's no key for, notice my hands aren't touching the keyboard. There's no character for like no character being pressed down. So it's the last thing that was presented up. So right now, nothing is being held down, but because the computer can't figure out that it's nothing, so to speak, it's not going to change it. If you also mash the keyboard, it's kind of funny. I'm like mashing, you can actually get a whole bunch of characters to be stuck because the computer can't react fast enough. Remember, it's doing it every fraction of a second, but it's only as fast as it can process. So fun little thing there. And then last but not least, let's go back here according to what we had inside of this. We noticed that there was a separate function called onKeyHolds with two parameters being called for. You need to add two arguments specifically into these spots here to make it work. Let's do exactly what they're talking about here. So if you take a look here, this normally would be commented. So let me run this. This is exactly the same thing we had before. So it's the exact same thing where it wraps around. Nothing's different. The only difference is right here in the comment, we have the onKeyHolds function with two arguments being passed through it. The right arrow key and then the number 5. This is only for testing purposes. If you want to go for it, use it. Only for testing purposes. The autograder will be using this a lot. So instead of you guys seeing something like this, I'm just going to example here. Instead of you seeing something like this, where they say onKeyHold 5 times, because that's arduous and tedious, what they're going to do instead is onKeyHolds, where it's going to be the right arrow and it's going to do it 5 times in its sequence, just like what I just did right now. Let's go ahead and do this. What's going to happen is it's going to hit the right arrow. It's going to pretend you hit the right arrow key 5 times, in a sense. It's kind of hard to tell because what does it mean to hold it 5 times? And what it really just is saying is in that fraction of a second, it's going to do it in 5 cycles. So it's going to do it once, then twice, then thrice, and then so on and so forth. So we can kind of figure out mathematically how this is going to affect our code because we know that if we hold the right arrow, it's going to increase the x value of our cyan dot by 10. So if I'm holding it 5 times and I know that it increases by 10 every single time I press it down and hold it, so 5 times 10 should be 50. Okay, I know that the x value, the x value here is, okay, I should restart this because it's not doing it correctly. Nope, let's try this again before we do that. Here we go. So we know the x value is at 200. And so what's going to happen is after I hold it down for 5 times or 5 cycles, it should get to 200 plus 50, which is at 250. So let's try that. Let's run this where we have this uncommented at line 14. Let's hold it, and we can see clearly. Let me scroll up in case I cover it with my face here. We can see clearly it is at x equals 250. So super nice thing for test bugging, for checking things out, seeing how it works in your code. Definitely capitalize on it and use it when needed. Pretty much that's it. Again, the hardest part is remembering the setup here, especially with this part where we say if this character is in the list called keys, then do something with it. Just make sure you guys have that set and good to go. Otherwise, you guys should be set for the exercises and go ahead and have fun with this.